right. So week 14 done. Week 15 heading at us. And we are beginning the last major concept that we're going to cover in this class, which is making API calls. So I'll talk about that towards the end, but I'm excited for this last part. But what I said I would do in the video for last night is talk about my approach to handling the multi-item order class form implementation. But let me say in general, what I saw last night was great because it seems like most of you got the idea of the class and what you needed to do to set up the class to handle multi-line, multi-item orders. And it wasn't so much that you didn't have that before, but you did it and you did the form and you got some form of validation on there. So remember, anytime we accept input in this class, we must validate it beyond the minimal of required if it's an input field, right? So I saw really good progress last night, and it was so fun to see the different approaches. As always, I think that's one of my most enjoyable things because I also learn when I look at your code. I think that's the purpose, is that we all learn together. So you'd already seen mine if you checked out the week 14. So let me just show you the code itself, which I will push. Okay, so what I did, is this mine? Yeah. So I set up of course, my event listener, right? And then cleared the area of the error message. And then what I did is I said, is item one valid? So for my implementation, I only required line one to be valid. And then after that, and then through some user feedback into the form if they didn't have that. Because after that, then I handled it with these on event listener for focus. So once the next line got the focus, then I added required dynamically into the form once the user placed their focus, meaning their tab position. Like if you tab through input fields, placing it there. And then that I dynamically did. And it was great to see that Josh last night did dynamically adding lines, which was fun because that was something I thought about too, but it was fun to see his implementation. So this is the way I handled it. And so only if the first line was valid, right? And then on my call, so I did a check inputs, setting that variable for the first time. I still called it for the other two lines, but I didn't need a return variable, even though there's a return on the function. So I kind of went, maybe not the best. But what I did there is I said, if the item was equal to just item question, because that was my first selection, or the quantity was nothing. So in either of those two cases, I wouldn't actually add, and this is how I handled the multi-item, was I set a global for order lines, and then I pushed that item ordered, item ordered, item cost, and item quantity into this global array. And then I came back and I only said if it's valid. Then I set up the new order. And in this case, and it was fun to see how some of you did actually a name on the order, which was great. I just did online because that is definitely another way you could handle that, right? And then there was my input. There was my text for error. The one thing I just want to say, and some of you, and I don't know if you got this from my example, but it's something we didn't really talk about because as of last week, we were saying that every time you substantiated a new object from your class, that you gave it a new name on the second one. Well, with a form, because it creates its own context, okay? So every time you submit that form, right, then you get a new context for your next form, so you can use the same name. So that's why you don't have to do order one, order two every time that form is submitted. Now I did this not because we saw it, but because you're going to want to think about this if you are at this point working, which I hope some of you are, and I'm going to kind of move into talking about that a little more next, but actually re-implementing or implementing, you taking your Dev 2 and Dev 1 and implementing it into a class, mostly class, using class for its function. Okay, so the other thing is, I know several of you did not clear the form. So the other thing about form validation, like if we were to talk about its requirements, not only do you have to make sure either with a combination of required and then using type number, if that is a true, if that input requires number, but also once a user submits the form, you should always clear whatever those inputs are. It just is a visual cue to the user that that form has been submitted. So what I did this time is I used something a little different for mine. I used a form.reset and it just reset the form, and it's just a little simpler way. I think I saw somebody else do this before. I just never used it. So I thought I'm going to use this just to see how it worked, and it worked fine. Okay, so that's what I did to implement mine. Again, really good output that I saw last night. So here's what I want to say. A couple things. After I talk about this, I am going to talk about a change I did to the due date for the Dev 2. Okay. So first thing I want to say is this. You now have enough information to take your Dev 2. I think, Naomi, you were talking about this. Naomi, is that you were like, I need to come talk to me, Rio, next week. And this is a perfect time, like in week 15, coming into 15 is a great time because you have everything you need to work on your Dev 2. You can take, and here's what I would suggest you do. You can keep your CSS the way it was. That's fine. Build your class, handle the form submission, right? And then what we could do, and this is my plan for next week, I had planned to do it this week, but it just didn't happen, is to show you the example. I think what I will do is go ahead and put Motsins from another semester where, and think about this, once you get the input for wherever the data you're collecting for your Dev 1, right? That class would handle gathering, validating, calculating that data. And then once you store that into local storage, you could have another class that handles all those entries in storage, which really kind of makes sense once I think about it. So I just want to tell you right now, what you would probably want to do this coming week is actually do that part where you write the class for your data entry from your form for your Dev from your Dev 2, create a new directory, set that up, go ahead and convert that over. By the way, if you wanted to, you could also create a branch here. That's something I'm actually going to say is another way. Instead of creating a Dev 2 directory, you could take your Dev 1, create a branch. If you've never done it, let me know. I'll show you an example. So a perfect week to be doing it, because in order you could in the next couple of weeks, right, have your Dev 2 ready to go. Now, here's what I've done in thinking about the Dev 2 timeline. I ended up moving the due date forward 2 days. Okay. So I had it before due on Thursday night. And then, as I said, all the reviews had to be done. But I decided that maybe it'd be better to actually make it due on Tuesday and then give a couple of days of reviews for those students working right up to the due date on Tuesday. So here's what I did. First, I made that on Tuesday, right? So it is actually due Tuesday night when I wake up Wednesday morning. And so what I did is, and I'll release them, I'm trying to think of maybe I won't do a separate video where I cover this. I think this will serve for that. I'll also republish the link to the sign-up sheet probably Monday. I think I'll do it. That way students who have checked out the attendance, because I noticed not everyone is replying to attendance, so I'm kind of trying to encourage that here. I don't know if it'll do that. But in this case so for our Dev 2, right, I'm going to allow sign up starting the week prior on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Monday and Tuesday, and there is that cutoff, that due date, right? And then so you have to have it done by midnight, but you have some either review or assistant sessions you can sign up for here. And then there'll be some sessions afterwards if you want. And then I did a couple more on Wednesday because that seems to be the more popular. And then on Thursday from 1 to 3, that will be the final time, right? So you do have to complete it just to show you a visual on that, because I think it is good to see what that looks like. So if I roll forward into April, and then I look at, let's say, look at our class, right? You can see that Dev 2 then is due on Tuesday night of the 18th. Then that gives you the 19th and 20th if you're submitting there. But here's why I'm trying to encourage you is, like, you could have it done with, and then what you're doing to the end of this class is really just going through the learn togethers and the code ups for handling the API calls, the 3 different paradigms, the callbacks, right, the promises, and the async await. So this is why the one thing that Andrew does in the course is he uses the same code base of the Hangman, and he makes his own API calls to get a word for this, and which is fine, right? Some of you, and I think I talked to at least one of you, who we were talking about ways they might be able to integrate an API call into their Dev 1. So, I think taking on both would be like, both meaning a class implementation and an API. But if you want to do both, that's definitely a great way to level up your skill. But I'm also happy to see students implement a class implementation if that's their desire, and then get the experience of the API. Or you might figure out, I don't want to do the class, but I do want to focus on the API. And this is the week that you're going to get that experience of what the beginning, like kind of the older way to do it. But again, it's still relevant because many people still have code bases written in those callbacks. But you're making a call to an API and you're getting something back. So I'm going to actually replay something I've only done twice now this semester from a previous semester, the Learn Together. But I might do what I kind of did yesterday, which is, as I coded up my example, because I'm going to use a JSON placeholder to give you an experience of making those API calls. Because there's a lot that can happen in these API calls. And here's what I want to leave you with. When you're getting exposed to these 3 different paradigms of thinking about doing API calls, do know that oftentimes it's not on the client side, meaning we are doing client-side JavaScript. It's on the server side that we're making API calls. So we run up against some security issues, depending on which API that you're looking at, having a call out to, right? So I was thinking on my EV tracking, like, what API could I call? And then I was thinking maybe Tesla stock data, right? Some kind of ticker on that. And I'm like, no, but how about EV news, right? Because RSS is just another way to grab data and put it into your page. So I was thinking about that but then I'd have to see, do they block the API call from the client side? Now, we might be venturing into areas right now that you kind of go, Rio, what are you talking about? We'll get there. I'm just kind of foreshadowing, right, what's coming. And it's stuff that I don't think Andrew covers very well, but it is definitely something in the real world as you start looking at APIs you can run into. Okay, so just to summarize, I went over my code for week 14, the way I implemented this. I talked about your implementation. I talked about the change of the end of semester due date for Dev 2. I talked about going ahead and the concept of using 2 classes. I haven't given you that code example. I will. My goal is actually by next week, because I looked at the Motson's code, and I'm not sure that would be as helpful. There's a lot going on in his code, so I want to give you a simpler example. And then I talked about, right, where we're heading with the due dates. I showed you the sign up schedule. Again, I think I'll release that on Monday. And I just kind of talked about some of the issues that you might run into when you're looking at your own API calls. But for this next couple of weeks, the experience you're going to get is making an API call with somebody giving you an example, first from Andrew and then from me, to at least enough to understand these three paradigms, of which this week is the first one with callbacks. It's a lot. It's a lot in that one. Okay. Peace out. Have a great weekend. Talk to you later.